Hello there, friends. Douglas Whitner here, coming to you from my home office in Calgary, Alberta. Before we dive into today's story, and boy, do I have a doozy for you, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means the world to this old storyteller, and it helps me keep bringing you these tales from the trenches of corporate life. Now, settle in with your coffee or tea, because what I'm about to share with you happened to me about 15 years ago when I was in my early 40s, working as a senior marketing analyst at a mid-sized tech company here in Canada. It's a story about betrayal, cunning, and ultimately the sweetest revenge I've ever witnessed, or should I say, orchestrated. You see, sometimes in life, people will try to take credit for your hard work. They'll smile to your face while stabbing you in the back. But what they don't realize is that underestimating someone, especially someone who's been around the corporate block a few times, can be a very dangerous mistake. So pour yourself that drink, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the time my boss tried to steal my presentation and how I made sure he'd never forget the experience. It was March of 2009, and the economy was still reeling from the financial crisis. Companies everywhere were tightening their belts, and my employer, North Tech Solutions, was no exception. We'd already had 2 rounds of layoffs, and everyone was walking on eggshells, trying to prove their worth. I'd been with North Tech for about 7 years at that point, working my way up from a junior analyst to a senior position. I wasn't the flashiest guy in the office, never was one for office politics or schmoozing with the higher-ups. I preferred to let my work speak for itself, and my work was solid, damn solid. My direct supervisor was a man named Richard Pemberton. Call me Rick, he'd insist, with that used car salesman smile of his. Rick was about my age, maybe a year or 2 younger, but he'd only been with the company for 3 years. He'd been brought in from outside to head up our marketing analytics department, and from day one, it was clear he was more politician than analyst. Rick had a habit of taking credit for his team's successes while distancing himself from any failures. It was subtle at first, a comment here, a reframing there, but over time, it became increasingly obvious that Rick was building his reputation on the backs of his subordinates. Our CEO, Margaret Thornfield, had announced that she wanted a comprehensive analysis of market opportunities in the emerging social media advertising space. This was 2009. Remember, Facebook was still primarily for college students. Twitter was barely 3 years old, and most companies were still trying to figure out if social media was a fad or the future. Margaret wanted data. She wanted projections. She wanted a roadmap that would position North Tech as a leader in this new frontier, and she wanted it in 6 weeks. Rick called me into his office on a Monday morning, that plastic smile firmly in place. "Doug, my friend," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "I've got an opportunity for you." I should have known right then that something was up. Rick only called people by their first names when he wanted something. "Margaret wants this social media analysis, and I immediately thought of you," he continued. "You've always been our guy for the deep dive research projects. What do you think?" What did I think? I thought it was the kind of project that could make or break a career. Get it right, and you'd be seen as a visionary. Get it wrong. For the next 5 weeks, I lived and breathed social media analytics. I arrived at the office by 6:30 a.m. and rarely left before 8 p.m. I analyzed user behavior patterns, studied demographic breakdowns, conducted surveys, and built predictive models that would make a statistics professor weep with joy. Jennifer was incredible. Despite only having 10 official hours a week, she often stayed late to help me crunch numbers and verify calculations. Together, we uncovered insights that I knew would revolutionize how companies thought about social media marketing. we discovered that the 35 to 55 demographic was beginning to adopt Facebook at an accelerating rate, a trend that most analysts were completely missing. We identified optimal posting times, engagement patterns, and most importantly, we developed a framework for measuring ROI on social media campaigns that was unlike anything I'd seen in the industry literature. My presentation began to take shape. It wasn't just data and charts, though there were plenty of both. It was a story, a narrative about how social media was evolving from a communication tool into the most powerful marketing platform in human history. I crafted each slide with care, choosing colors and fonts that would be visually appealing while keeping the focus on the data. I wrote and rewrote the talking points until they flowed like poetry. This wasn't just a presentation, it was my masterpiece. Rick wanted weekly check-ins, but after the first 2 meetings where he barely glanced at my preliminary findings and spent most of the time talking about his weekend golf games, I started giving him increasingly high-level summaries. He seemed satisfied with vague updates about good progress and promising data. Looking back, I should have been suspicious of his lack of interest. Rick was many things, but he wasn't usually hands-off about high-profile projects. But I was so deep in my research, so focused on the work itself, that I missed the warning signs. It was during one of those late nights that frustration got the better of me. The data visualization software kept crashing every time I tried to create a complex chart, and by 11 p.m., I was exhausted and fed up. In a moment of stress relief, I started building absurd joke slides with fake companies like My Face and Tweetbook, projecting impossible growth rates and budget requirements in the billions. I called them my stress relief slides, and they made me laugh during those long nights. Companies with ridiculous names, ROI projections of 847%, marketing budgets that exceeded NASA's annual spending. It was my way of blowing off steam, and I'd saved them in a folder clearly marked, "Do not use joke slides." 3 days before the presentation to Margaret, I finally had everything complete. 67 slides of pure gold, backed by over 200 hours of research and analysis. I'd identified 12 specific market opportunities, developed implementation timelines, and even created. Thursday morning, Jennifer appeared at my desk with 2 cups of coffee and a mischievous expression that made my stomach drop. "We need to talk," she said, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. She led me to one of the small conference rooms and closed the door behind us. "Doug," she said, her voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something about that USB drive you gave Rick yesterday." My blood went cold. "What about it?" "I saw him yesterday evening after you left. He was in his office, going through your presentation files, and I could see his screen from the hallway." Jennifer paused, her jaw clenched. "He wasn't just reviewing your work, Doug. He was editing it, changing the metadata, replacing your name with his in the document properties, even adjusting some of the language to match his writing style. He's planning to present it as his own work," I said, though part of me had suspected this all along. Completely. And when I realized what he was doing, Jennifer's smile turned wicked. "Well, let's just say I may have made a small adjustment to his plans." "What kind of adjustment?" Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was a screenshot of my file directory, clearly showing the folder structure I'd created. The main presentation was there, clean and professional, but right next to it was another file with an almost identical name. Instead of social media analysis, final.pptx, this one was labeled social with a caret and media with a caret and analysis with a caret and final with a caret and dot and pptx, media analysis, final draft.pptx. "Jennifer," I said slowly, "please tell me you didn't do what I think you did. I may have created a special version of your presentation, one that includes some of your creative stress relief slides mixed in with the real content. And I may have made sure that when Rick copied files to his computer last night, he grabbed the wrong version. I stared at her in horror and admiration. You booby-trapped my presentation. I prefer to think of it as ensuring that credit goes where credit is due. Rick wanted to present your work without understanding it. Fine. Let him present a version that will make it very clear he had nothing to do with creating it. Jennifer, if this goes wrong, it won't go wrong for you, she said firmly. You gave Rick exactly what you said you gave him, a comprehensive presentation based on solid research. What he chose to do with those files is entirely his responsibility. She showed me more photos on her phone. Slide 23, which should have shown Facebook demographic data, instead featured analysis of Fakebook's user base. Slide 31 projected ROI growth of 847% in the first quarter, one of my ridiculous joke numbers. Slide 45 recommended a marketing partnership with Tweetbook, a platform that didn't exist. The genius was in the subtlety. Someone quickly skimming through the presentation might miss these details entirely, but anyone actually trying to present the content would find themselves talking about fictional companies and impossible stuff. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly. I got to the office early and tried to focus on other work, but it was hopeless. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing towards the executive wing, wondering what was about to unfold. At 8:30 a.m., Rick's BMW pulled into his reserved parking spot. When he emerged, he was wearing his most expensive suit and carrying himself with the confident stride of a man who was about to impress the CEO. At 9:45 a.m., Rick stopped by my cubicle. "Wish me luck, Doug," he said with that trademark grin. "Time to show Margaret what our department can do." "Break a leg," I replied, meaning it more literally than he realized. Jennifer appeared at my desk at 10:15 a.m., carrying coffee and wearing barely contained excitement. "Thought you might need this," she said. We sat in tense silence, pretending to work while waiting for something to happen. At 10:32 a.m., we heard it, a sound that would become legendary in North Tech office lore, the unmistakable noise of Rick Pemberton's voice, rising to a near shout, followed by what could only be described as a commotion. Voices grew louder as they moved down the hallway. Margaret Thornfield's voice, crisp and controlled, but clearly displeased. Rick's voice, higher pitched than usual, and talking very, very fast. And then they appeared. Margaret strode into the main office like an avenging angel in a power suit. She was small, but commanded attention like someone twice her size. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her blue eyes scanned the room with laser focus. Rick followed behind her, looking like a man who just watched his career get fed through a paper shredder. His face was flushed, his expensive suit rumpled, and there was visible sweat on his forehead. "I want to speak to whoever actually prepared this analysis," Margaret announced to the office. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner. "And I want to speak to them now." The entire office went silent. Rick cleared his throat. "Margaret, I can explain." "Mr. Pemberton," Margaret interrupted with cutting authority. "You've done quite enough explaining for one morning. I'm looking for the person who actually understands this research." I felt every eye in the office turn toward me. I stood up from my desk, straightened my tie, and walked over to where they stood. "That would be me, Mom," I said. "Douglas Whitner, Senior Marketing Analyst." Margaret studied me. "Mr. Whitner, did you prepare the social media marketing analysis that was just presented to me?" "Yes, Ma'am," with assistance from Jennifer Chen. "All of it?" "Yes, Ma'am." Margaret nodded slowly. "I see. And Mr. Whitner, are you familiar with a company called Fakebook?" My cheeks grew warm. "No, ma'am. There's no such company. Facebook is the actual platform I was analyzing. What about Tweetbook? Are you familiar with that platform? No, ma'am, that's not real either. The platforms I analyzed were Facebook and Twitter. Margaret turned. At exactly 2 p.m., I knocked on Margaret's office door. Her office was impressive, large, well-appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of Calgary. But what struck me was how organized everything was, with documents in perfect stacks and not a pen out of place. "Have a seat, Mr. Whitner," she said. "Before we begin, you're not in trouble. What happened this morning was illuminating, but I don't hold you responsible for Mr. Pemberton's failures." For the next 45 minutes, I walked Margaret through my real research. I explained my methodology, showed her the data supporting my conclusions, and outlined my implementation strategy. She asked probing questions that demonstrated she understood both the business implications and technical details. It was the best presentation of my career, not because of slides or graphics, but because I was finally presenting my work to someone who appreciated the effort behind it. When I finished, Margaret sat back and studied me. "Impressive," she said. "This is exactly the forward-thinking analysis we need to stay competitive." "Thank you, Mom. I have a question, and I want honesty. Did you know Mr. Pemberton planned to present your work as his own?" I chose my words carefully. I suspected he showed very little interest in the actual research, seeming more concerned with the final presentation than understanding the work. "And yet you allowed him to present it." "He's my supervisor. It wasn't my decision to make." Margaret nodded. "How did Mr. Pemberton end up with a version including fictional companies and impossible projections?" This was the dangerous question that could implicate Jennifer. "I'm not sure," I said carefully. "I gave Mr. Pemberton my presentation Wednesday afternoon. What he chose to do with those files was up to him." Margaret studied me, and I had the impression she knew there was more to the story. But instead of pressing, she smiled genuinely. "Mr. Whitner, this company needs people who think strategically about our digital future. I'd like you to consider a new position, Director of Digital Strategy, reporting directly to me. Substantial salary increase, equity options, and budget to build your own team." I stared at her, processing what I was hearing. 20 minutes ago, I'd been a senior analyst. Now the CEO was offering me a director position. "What about Mr. Pemberton?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Mr. Pemberton will no longer be with the company as of Monday. His employment will be terminated for cause." Because of the presentation? Because of a pattern of behavior this morning simply brought to light? Do you think you're the only employee who's complained about Mr. Pemberton taking credit for others' work? I realized there had probably been others, people too afraid or junior to make waves, but who'd eventually found ways to get their stories to Margaret. "Are you interested?" she asked. Was I interested? After 15 years of watching people like Rick take credit for my work, was I interested in finally getting the recognition I deserved? "Yes, Mom," I said. "I'm very interested." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Rick cleaned out his office the following Monday, avoiding eye contact with everyone as security escorted him out. Word spread quickly through the office about what had happened, and I became something of a legend, the analyst who'd booby-trapped his own presentation to catch a credit-stealing boss. Of course, officially, I knew nothing about any booby trap. As far as anyone was concerned, I'd simply delivered my presentation as requested, and Rick had somehow managed to grab the wrong files. An honest mistake that revealed his dishonest intentions. Jennifer was promoted to Senior Data Analyst and became the first member of my new team. During our first official meeting as Director and Senior Analyst, she grinned and said, "So, any regrets about how things played out?" "Just one," I replied. I wish I could have seen Rick's face when he started talking about Fakebook's market penetration rates. we both lost. Looking back on that experience 15 years later, I've learned several important lessons that I try to share with young professionals starting their careers. First, document everything. Keep copies of your work, maintain records of your contributions, and make sure you can prove what you've accomplished. In my case, having detailed research notes and data analysis saved me when questions arose about who had actually done the work. Second, find allies. Jennifer's support was crucial to exposing Rick's behavior. While I never asked her to sabotage the presentation, her decision to act came from months of watching Rick take credit for other people's work. Build relationships with colleagues who share your values and work ethic. You never know when you'll need their support. Third, sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people hang themselves with their own rope. I didn't actively sabotage Rick's presentation, but I also didn't go out of my way to save him from his own dishonesty. When someone is determined to take credit for work they don't understand, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them try. Fourth, quality work speaks for itself. My presentation was good enough that Margaret immediately recognized its value, even when it was presented poorly by someone who didn't understand it. Focus on doing excellent work, and opportunities will eventually present themselves. Finally, corporate politics are inevitable, but they don't have to be toxic. As a manager, I worked hard to create an environment where people were recognized for their contributions and where collaboration was valued over competition. You can't always control the culture around you, but you can influence it through your own actions and decisions. The experience also taught me about the power of preparation meeting opportunity. I'd been ready for a bigger role without realizing it. The research skills, analytical thinking, and strategic vision were already there. When Margaret offered me the director position, I was able to step into it successfully because I'd been unknowingly preparing for years. But perhaps the most important lesson is about integrity. Rick's downfall wasn't ultimately about a booby-trapped presentation. It was about a pattern of dishonest behavior that finally caught up with him. In contrast, my career advancement came from consistently doing good work and maintaining professional relationships built on trust and mutual respect. Just last month, I received a LinkedIn message from a young marketing analyst at a tech company in Toronto. She'd heard my story through a mutual connection and was facing a similar situation with a supervisor who was taking credit for her work. "What should I do?" she asked. "I don't want to rock the boat, but I also don't want to let him get away with it." I spent an hour on the phone with her, sharing the lessons I'd learned and helping her think through her options. We talked about documentation, about finding allies, about the importance of having conversations with senior leadership when appropriate. 2 weeks later, she sent me another message. Her supervisor had been called out by their CEO for presenting analysis he clearly didn't understand. The situation was handled more directly than mine had been. No booby-trapped presentations necessary, but the outcome was similar. She was promoted, her supervisor was transferred to a different department, and she's now leading her own team of analysts. These stories matter because they remind us that workplace bullying and credit theft aren't acceptable, even when they're common. Every time someone stands up for themselves or their colleagues, it makes the workplace a little bit better for everyone. As I finish writing this story, I'm reminded of how much my life changed because of that presentation. Not just the career advancement or the financial success, but the confidence that came from finally standing up for my work and having it recognized. If you're facing a similar situation, remember that you have more power than you think. Document your work, build relationships, focus on quality, and don't be afraid to let your accomplishments speak for themselves. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to give them exactly what they're asking for. and let them discover whether they're actually prepared to handle it. Well, friends, that's the story of how my boss tried to steal my presentation and ended up destroying his own career instead. It's a reminder that in the corporate world, as in life, honesty and hard work usually win out in the end, even if it takes a little creative justice to make it happen. I hope you found this tale entertaining and maybe even a little inspiring. If you did, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I've got plenty more stories from my decades in the corporate trenches, and your support helps me keep sharing them. Remember, whether you're dealing with a credit-stealing boss, a toxic work environment, or any other professional challenge, you're stronger than you think, and you deserve recognition for your hard work. Sometimes it just takes the right moment, and maybe the right booby trap, to make sure you get it. Until next time, this is Douglas Whitner, reminding you to keep working hard, keep standing up for yourself, and always, always keep backup copies of your presentations. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.